The Sixers get their guy hiring Nick Nurse as their next head coach. The Phillies split a weekend series down in Atlanta versus the Braves. And plus, will D-Hop be a fit in Philly? That and much, much more when we are back in 30 seconds.
Gets around in front. And Philadelphia has it.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Phaithful Phanatics show here on a Tuesday morning. I hope everybody had a very, very fun and joyful Memorial Day weekend. We are back live on DSM Media's YouTube and Twitter channel. So, guys, if you are new to the channel, make sure first and foremost you check us out on Twitter at DSM_media. Hit that follow button. We greatly, greatly appreciate it. While you're over on the page, make sure to check out the link tree in our bio. It will take you to every social media platform we are available on. If you guys want to be interactive throughout today's show, like my man Hunter is doing right here, if you want to check out any of our DSM pregame lives, make sure to check out the YouTube link specifically. This is the best spot to get your thoughts, comments, and questions pulled up on the screen here with your host. I am one half of them at DylanJD98. To my left, my faithful co-host Scotty. You can find him on Twitter as well at Scotty Drown. My man, what is going on? How was your weekend?
Oh, it was great, man. Happy Memorial Day to everybody out there. And yeah, it was a great weekend. Obviously, you get the 3-day weekend, the 3-day break. We had some tech difficulties to start up the day today.
Yeah, so we're on high def now.
Never any good, but we got it figured out. Now we're in full high def. So hopefully it gives you a little bit better quality out there.
Means.
Yeah, whatever that means. But let us know how it's looking, how it's sounding. Make sure everything's straight here. But nonetheless, sorry for the late start. We'll get you started here nonetheless.
Let's do it, man.
Great weekend.
Well, let's start with the topic that is going to drive most of the show, and the news that broke yesterday afternoon, kind of taking over Sixers Twitter on Memorial Day, and that is the fact that the Sixers have found their next head coach in no other than our number one target, Mr. Nick Nurse. Obviously, details are not out. They have not agreed to specific terms. His agency and the Sixers are working that out as we speak. But Nick Nurse, nonetheless, is your next head coach, Scotty. So I'll just start this to you, man. Before we get into the X's and O's of this thing and what he brings to the table and maybe what some people might be negative about, because I'm not going to lie, I saw a little bit more negativity on the timeline than I was expecting to see. Now, most of those people I don't pay too much attention to regardless. So their opinion doesn't matter too much to me, but it was still a little weird. It was a little overwhelming to see a decent amount of negativity on the Nick Nurse hire. But this just feels surreal to me. And I think I texted this to you. I texted it to George Ryder yesterday. Like, with being a Philly fan and dealing with so much, trauma and pain and disappointment, you never expect your team to, do what you want them to do. And in the past couple of months, we've really, like with the Eagles and Howie Roseman, you've gotten a lot of that. You got a lot of surprises of them going out and getting players that you've wanted them to go get above anything else. The Phillies, obviously, Trey Turner was number one on the shortstop list. They get him. Now you get to the Sixers, and it's like you and I break down 6 or 7 different candidates. They're all on the table. And the Sixers and Daryl Morey actually go out and get the number one guy you and I were looking at here on the Phaithful Phanatics show. How surprised are you that they got the deal done with Nick Nurse? They're essentially the first team to get the job done. Obviously, Milwaukee goes out and brings in a former assistant, but just how surprised are you that Nick Nurse is actually the coach of the Sixers right now?
On a scale of 1 to 10, I would probably say around a 5 or a 6.
Really?
Just based on the connect, we know how Daryl Morey is with connections. So I kind of figured that the Sixers, that Nick Nurse would be the Sixers guy. I figured that would happen. My concern was coming from Nick Nurse's side and the other opportunities that were available to him. Now, even Boston last night getting eliminated. What happens with Joe Mazzulla? Is there any intrigue there if their coach gets canned? But Phoenix was an obvious option for Nick Nurse at the end there. He ends up, going with Daryl Morey, that connection, going with Joel Embiid over Devin Booker and KD in a core in Phoenix. And then even the Milwaukee position. Now, there's a part of me that feels like maybe, just maybe, he just let his guy get the Milwaukee position in a sense. Like, if I'm going to get a job elsewhere anyways, if Adrian Griffin's getting on this,
maybe pull myself out of
let me just let my guy get this. But maybe that didn't happen. Maybe he did want Philly over all of the other opportunities. And that's the route that I'll go with to make myself comfortable here. But yeah, no, I think it's a great hiring. Ultimately, it is a lot different from Doc. There was a lot more negativity out on the social media airways yesterday, which surprised me because I guess my thing is, who else would you have wanted it to be? Like, what was the better? Like, I get it. If you're down on the Sixers right now, you're just down on the Sixers. You don't have to shit on Nick Nurse. Like, you just don't feel confident in Joel Embiid and the team that has been built here, the core that's been built here. And that's fine. Like, if you lost all hope from this second round exit again, that's fine. But you don't have to shit on Nick Nurse. It was the best coaching candidate that was on the market, and the Sixers were able to go out and get him. So I think some people are using some of their anger and sadness from the end of the postseason, which I totally understand. At the end of the day, there's going to take some, self-digging and some, self-diving into for this Sixers team when it comes to Embiid, when it comes to Tyrese Maxey and some of these other guys that are going to be here next year. So, yeah, there is part of that mixed in there, but Nick Nurse will make a difference with this team. He's a complete X's and O's guy. And I think he's going to be a lot different from Doc in a sense of holding guys accountable. Doc is obviously a player's coach. I wouldn't say Nick Nurse is not a player's coach, but he's also not a guy that's going to shy away from holding his guys accountable. And I think that's going to be a huge thing. And then once again, just the X's and O's running plays. I think having things more organized here in Philly will work wonders because there was just a lot of ISO ball last year and a lot of standing around on offense. I think that's the thing I'm mostly excited about. He brings championship pedigree. What else could you ask for?
4 short years ago.
Bulls are out there. There's guys like Monty Williams, right? This guy has a ring too. He won it with Kawhi in one season of having Kawhi. He was able to get a championship ring. Then the following season goes 53-19, second seed in the East. So a lot of talk if Kawhi carried Nick Nurse. I'm not going to go that far. He developed a lot of these guys. The biggest thing for me, and we can dive into this a little bit further with all of these guys, but the biggest thing for me is thinking about not only what Nick Nurse can do with Joel Embiid, because I'm excited that he's excited to work with Joel Embiid, first of all. I'm excited that they met before this happened as well, that Joel Embiid had an input in this. But Tyrese Maxey is my biggest excitement because I think he's going to help him develop. You look at some of the guard play, specifically Fred VanVleet, the way he developed him up in Toronto. And I'm what's confusing me is there's been like mixed reports. Like, is Nick Nurse a good player development coach or is he not?
It's funny, man. Nobody knows. Right.
And nobody knows. People that say he's great. So it is a little weird in that sense. But
he lost the locker room apparently in Toronto, but Fred VanVleet is quote tweeting the Woj tweet that he hired with, the hands and basically like the congrats thing. Now, he was the only Toronto player I saw do that. So I don't know, but that's the leader of that team. Right. Yeah. So we don't really know. Whereas when you talk about Doc losing the team, you had James Harden, publicly to media talking about, our relationships. It's okay. And you got him rolling his eyes in the huddle when Doc's speaking to the team. And so there's more proof in the pudding that Doc lost the locker room compared to what we know or don't know with Nick Nurse and his coaching ability up in Toronto. I'm excited to continue this conversation because there's a lot to really dive into. A few things that you hit on. In terms of like surprise level, I guess I'm just more surprised from the Sixers point of view because, again, it just feels like what you want, you don't always get. Like, I was waiting for, all 4 or 5 candidates to be available, and in comes Frank Vogel, right? The Woj drop, the Woj bomb that Frank Vogel's the next head coach. And it's like, that's a disappointment, right? And we didn't get that. So I think the Daryl Morey point is huge, but I want to look at it more so from Nick Nurse's point of view. And this is what kind of gets me excited, right? In a time where we're all down on our Sixers. is the fact that he chose here over those other places. Now, ultimately, it came down to us in Phoenix because he pulled himself out of the running in Milwaukee. Now, whether that is because an assistant from Toronto ultimately can get that job, who knows? But if he just pulled himself out of that running, Embiid, Giannis.
Yeah.
He chose Embiid. Now you get to the D-Book and Durant. Now, you and I broke this down, and Nick Nurse seems like a logical guy, so maybe he thought the same thing we laid out as well, where if I go to Phoenix, maybe I got a year or two to win a championship with Durant's age and health and all these question marks and CP3. So maybe he thought about it that way. But the bottom line is he chose to coach here in Philadelphia, and he chose here in large part due to the MVP and to be able to coach Joel Embiid. Now, I also think this is important because while we're also down on the Sixers, we're also very down on Joel Embiid from his Game 7 performance and the question marks we have in his postseason ability moving forward. And I think Nick Nurse kind of reassured us, like, hold on, don't overreact, because his pitch, his spiel to get this job was to not say, and I get your point, I'm very interested to see what he could do with Tyrese Maxey, but it wasn't centered around the youth and Tyrese Maxey. It wasn't centered around bringing this in or bringing James Harden back. It was to say you had the MVP of the league. He's 28. Do not forget this. Do not overreact. And we are going to center it around him. We're going to center this roster. We're going to center this game plan. We're going to have more off-ball movement. I'm very excited that Nick Nurse kind of reinforced the idea that, hey, your window is still open, and it's because of your 7-foot center MVP. And as we're all really down on him because of what just happened, it's like we kind of get to regroup, retool, and look at this from a new head coach point of view. I'm interested in that. I'm interested, and I like to see the growth and maturity in Joel Embiid, because obviously we know the public kind of, not dispute, but the public back and forth he and Nick Nurse had last year in terms of the postseason, and Nick Nurse crying about Joel Embiid flopping and getting free throws and so on and so forth. Joel having that meeting with him during the interview process apparently went very well. That's maturity. That's, you know what, dude? Yeah, you annoyed me. We pissed each other off. We're both grown men. You know how to defend me. Now we get to work together. There's a lot to look into, man, but I'm excited as all hell for the Nick Nurse, head coaching job here in Philadelphia. And we haven't even gotten into any of the X's and O's kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, I feel you. I think it's important that he has the buy-in with Embiid, obviously the MVP, the star of the team. And that's where it starts. And to your point about the Sixers making kind of the right move, right? It was kind of the no-brainer move in my mind.
I agree. And that's why I thought that it wasn't going to happen.
But what I would say is that since Daryl Morey has gotten here, I know he catches a lot of heat, especially for the trade deadline.
He has done a lot of the stuff.
He tends to do the things that we feel are very obvious,
right at the moment.
That we agree. Yeah. I mean, you see him come in, he immediately trades out Horford to OKC, and we get draft compensation, right? Like that.
Danny Green and Steph Curry get brought in, right?
Steph Curry, and you bring in Danny Green, and then you bring in DeAnthony Melton, and then you bring in James Harden, right? Or before the DeAnthony Melton move. Joel Embiid wants PJ Tucker. That's the obvious signing. He goes out and gets PJ Tucker. Right. It was pretty obvious that if the Sixers didn't get out of the second round this season, Doc Rivers kind of had to go. He fires Doc Rivers. So while Daryl Morey catches a lot of heat, I would say that he does a lot of what Sixers fans have wanted to do. I would suspect that the next move is to trade Tobias Harris, the next thing on the list that Sixers fans would probably want done.
The wish list, brother.
Yeah, exactly. It's the wish list. And he's sitting here checking off the boxes. So I think from that standpoint, when you think about it with Daryl Morey, he does kind of give us what we want. Not that that's a good or a bad thing. I think things have just been fairly obvious in these situations.
I would say this, and I actually brought up this conversation yesterday after the Nurse hiring kind of got put out by Woj, was like, it's not covering your ass, and it's not pandering to the fan base. It's not, I wouldn't say he's necessarily like giving us what we want in terms of he's hearing us and he's doing as we think or we say. I think it's just the fact that it kind of, even though he does catch a lot of heat, it covers him in terms of, hey, the majority thought that was the right move. No more like when Howie Roseman goes out and drafts Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson when everybody's screaming for Justin Jefferson, and then Jalen Reagor implodes. Now you look 10 times worse because you tried to be the smartest dude in the room.
Exactly.
And it didn't work out. When you're Daryl Morey now and you hire Nick Nurse, I'm not saying it's 110% going to work out. We don't know that. But a large majority of the Sixers fan base believes it will and wanted Nick Nurse as the head coach. So now if it doesn't work out, Daryl Morey's going to catch heat for it. But we also, as a fan base, co-signed off on this, if that makes sense. I will say to kind of X off the negatives that we were seeing on social media, the real only pushback I've seen is that Kawhi carried him and blah, blah, blah. Newsflash, everybody. Go back to every single title team for the last, I don't know how many years and decades, and there's a superstar on each and every one of them, whether that is LeBron James, whether that is Giannis Antetokounmpo, whether that's Kawhi Leonard, whether that's Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, Michael Jordan, Shaq, Kobe. Where do you want me to stop the list here? Like, it is every team has a star. Don't know what you want me to say there. Then the other thing is the running jokes about how Joel Embiid's bodies and James Harden's knees are going to be hurting, in December because Nick Nurse is going to have him playing 44 minutes. Go back to that Kawhi year when they won a chip. Kawhi played 60 of 82 games, 62 of 82 games, played under 36 minutes per night, only had 4 games over 40 minutes, and those were all overtime games the entire season. Nick Nurse just played his youth a lot the last year or two in the regular season. He's not going to – I don't believe he's going to play Joel Embiid 40-plus minutes a night in the regular season, okay? Yeah. So, but that's where the negativity comes in.
Yeah, and it's understandable. I mean, every coach that comes in is going to have their flaws, right? They're going to have their positives and their negatives. The positives just have to outweigh the negatives, and I think that's the case here with Nick Nurse versus the other coaching candidates. It is interesting, though. Talking about Nick Nurse and kind of his fit with this team, I thought something from Sixers Adam, if you know him, he's from the Rights to Ricky Sanchez podcast. He's one of the people that was, I don't want to say he was negative about the hiring, but he was just maybe indifferent towards it, I guess you could say. He said not particularly inspired or discouraged by the Nick Nurse hire. I think he's probably a slight upgrade over Doc Rivers, but maybe not a meaningful one. The Sixers' major issue remains personnel, not coaching. It will be interesting to see if Nurse retains any of Rivers' assistants. So obviously a lot of takeaways there. Rivers' assistants. I don't know if you're going to keep any of those guys in-house. I would say Sam Cassell. I know we talked a lot about him. If he's going to be a head coach somewhere, maybe that's the case. If he can come back and be an assistant coach here, he has these relationships with these players already. That would be a good way for Nick Nurse to kind of bridge the gap there, right, and get to know these players. But that just usually doesn't happen, if we're being honest. The other thing here is obviously he points to personnel rather than coaching. I would argue that both were a problem.
That's the big thing, and you're spot on. You're 100% correct.
Personnel is a problem. I'm not going to sit here and say that that's not the truth. The Sixers, obviously, from what we've seen the rest of the playoffs, they could use some more depth, some more. Now, I don't even know if I want to say depth, but better fitting pieces,
right?
Pieces that will make this team go. But you could also have a coach that is willing to try things and see if those other pieces that were on the roster could have worked. Jalen McDaniels, maybe he gets more time to post. I don't know, right? You try new things.
Paul Reed might get some action at the 4.
Hey, that's what we're looking for. That trying new things, the willingness to be creative, I think is the biggest thing that we're getting here compared to Doc Rivers. So while personnel might be a bit of an issue,
it's an issue. It definitely was, and you saw that play out.
It's not as big with a coach that is willing to try different things and different rotations.
No, dude, listen, I would say that you and I are two of the guys that can actually go back and forth on this conversation because we gave Doc a lot of leadway this year.
Yeah.
We gave him we took a lot of that weight off his shoulders. And yes, this series lost to Boston was not nearly as much on him as it was the stars and Joel in game 7 and James for 4 of the 7 games and yada, 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 and the lack of depth and Tobias 2 points. Doc was not the main problem, but to just excuse the previous 2 years of work and the other issues and the rotational issues and the DeAndre Jordan issues of last year and to act like coaching wasn't a problem at all and to say that Nick Nurse is only a slight upgrade, I think that's a little ridiculous. Yeah, I think that Nick Nurse analytically, X's and O's wise, I think Nick Nurse is arguably a top 5 coach in the league. Doc, you can't make that argument for, and not even close. So we'll see how it works out. I do agree with this as well, to Brett's 2 points. Does it mean a championship? No, it doesn't guarantee a championship, obviously, but it means we don't have major mismatches against other coaches moving forward in the postseason. And this, I mean, I texted Scotty this last night. He's got a player option. We're going to get into this conversation in a few minutes as well. Kind of, can he draw now that they got that out of the way? Now that they brought in their next head coach, that helps the free agent process as well. Absolutely. Instead of having a vacancy at that spot, guys not knowing who's going to lead them. Jaden Springer could play, dude. That's the funny thing, Scotty. Another pushback we saw on Nurse even before the Sixers made the hire was that, he's just like Doc. He's not going to give the young guys a chance to play. What are you talking about? He's helped develop Pascal Siakam since day one. OG Anunoby and Scotty Barnes have stepped in and started since day one in Toronto. What do you mean he doesn't give young players an opportunity? Am I missing something?
I don't know where that comes from.
And honestly, if so, like, what young player on Toronto's bench is just melting away in the corner that we don't know about, that should be getting run?
Wasn't it just a few years ago where OG Anunoby was the young player that's getting the heavy burn? Like Pascal Siakam is the young player. Gary Trent Jr. is the young player.
Scotty Barnes, to Brett's point, he was their minutes leader last year, and he's been the leader for what? Years?
Rookie of the year, Scotty Barnes. I think you know what it is, and now that comes to the front of my mind. People are clinging to that Scotty Barnes second year development, right? And they're saying he didn't develop much from his rookie of the year status.
Well, maybe that's
he was a rookie of the year. It's hard to improve. Sophomore season is one of the hardest seasons in the NBA when you come in as a young player. So I think people just cling to narrative. It is kind of weird, man, because the Fred VanVleet, Pascal Siakam, these are clear examples of next level development. And that doesn't mean, similar to Embiid, it doesn't mean that Embiid was developed by every coach or that Doc Rivers turned him into an MVP, but it's a matter of putting your players in the right situations as well to make them comfortable. Make them.
It reminds me of? It reminds me of the Doc. Right? It reminds me of Doc only getting credit for the losses, not the wins. So Nick Nurse only gets credit and blame for Scotty Barnes not taking a jump in year 2, but you don't hear a peep when it comes to Siakam and FVV's development, right?
Right, exactly. So we'll ignore that one.
But who knows, man? Now, Scotty, let's get into a little bit more of the X's and O's kind of talk here when it comes to Nick Nurse as a hire. And this stood out to me in Woj's article on ESPN.com, right? So Nurse's desire to coach MVP Joel Embiid in his history with Sixers president of basketball operations, Daryl Morey, played a significant part in his decision to commit to Philly. He'll now be a part of a Sixers organization working to re-sign James Harden. Nurse oversaw an aggressive style of defense coaching the Toronto Raptors this season, helping them become the first team to record the most steals while allowing the fewest since the stat was initially tracked in 1973. The Raptors also led the league in points per game off of turnovers while allowing the fewest. What was a major issue the last 2 seasons for the Philadelphia 76ers? Transition defense.
Yeah, transition everything.
Shit. Oh, who would have known? So you had the defensive the aggressive defensive mindset from Nick Nurse. You have the ability to explore different lineups that we're probably going to see him utilize. And the other thing I loved in one of his, I don't know if it was his book or whatever article I had read it in, where he speaks on the fact that he does not believe in pounding the ball into the same spot of the floor to the same big man over and over again. He believes in off-ball. Wow. Yeah. Who would have thunk that's a possibility, Scotty? Yeah. All the things we were talking about post Boston series, what needs to change with the Sixers offense, what needs to be different with surrounding a Joel Embiid-led offense, it seems like he checks all the boxes. Now, if he'll continue to do those things is to be seen.
Yeah.
But for right now, it seems like a great fit, does it not?
Yeah, it does, man. It really does. And I think there's a lot of things that he brings that can, I don't want to say change the culture, even though that's kind of what needs to happen, but
I think he'll do that as well.
Change the flow of this team, the foul baiting, stuff like that. Maybe I'm interested to see how he handles that, right? He complained a lot about Joel Embiid and his flopping, right, in the playoff series. You had the James Harden conversation, that video that went viral right when it was announced that he was being considered for the Sixers job, of him talking about how to stop Harden and how he's not going to let Harden come in and get all these free throw attempts. So it's interesting because there's one end of the spectrum where maybe he comes in and he's like, no, stop all the foul baiting. We need to go strong to the rack, finish at the rim, right?
Or
there's the other side of that where he's intrigued by that option and by that ability of these guys, and maybe he can exploit that even further. One thing I am interested in, because you said, pounding the rock into the floor, in the same spot of the floor all the time. And it just made me think of James Harden. Obviously, Joel Embiid, when you pass the ball into the post, it made me think of James Harden. And I'll throw it to you because I don't know how I feel about it. Like, do you feel that James Harden fits Nick Nurse? Just from what you've seen from the Raptors, from what you have seen in videos, interviews from Nick Nurse, his approach, does James Harden fit that? I know the Sixers are going to go after him no matter what. Does he fit that, though?
Yeah, man, I think he can, and here's why. When we talk about James Harden, ISO ball, kind of pounding the ball through the floor over and over again, I'm going to go back. I'm going to attribute that to just Doc's offense and not really where James ISO is just that. Like, there's nothing drawn up. There's nothing schematic about what's about to happen. It's let James work, where with Nick – you're going to fit this style. You're going to have to fit this style of play. Now, that's going to come back to whether Harden is able to attribute to that, if he's able to buy into that type of play. Obviously, we heard his comments after the series about how he felt like he was underutilized and not appreciated enough in the offense. If that means he needs the ball more and he wants more ISO, I don't know how that works in a Nick Nurse offense, but if he's able to buy into the creativity, the off-the-ball kind of stuff, different, sets of pick and rolls with not just Joel, now I think he can definitely work in this Nick Nurse offense.
Yeah.
I think it more so comes back to Harden's buy-in to what his role would be, because you're not winning a championship. Whatever level James Harden still thinks he's on a daily basis, you're not contending for a championship if James Harden needs to put Chuck 16, 18 shots a night. You're just not going to compete that way. So he needs to buy in mentally to what he can do. And I think Nick Nurse will better suit and better place him than Doc Rivers was able to do.
I think, I get your point, because I think Nick Nurse will put everybody in better positions, to be candid, I guess. The confusing thing with Harden's comments at the end of the season was, in one end, he says he felt like he wasn't used as much as he should be. But then the other end of that spectrum, he said he wants a more free-flowing offense. So free-flowing offense sounds good. I agree. I would agree with that. But then it's where you're saying you're not being used enough. Maybe he just means, from a coaching standpoint, like him giving his input into the offense. Maybe that's what he means ultimately. But I agree with what you said. I think it's all about Harden's buy-in. If he's willing to buy into this team, obviously those Doc Rivers huddles were very deflating in reality. Man. Like, they weren't very well put together by Doc. It didn't seem like he knew what he was talking about a lot of the time, if we're being completely honest. And I think if Nick Nurse comes in, he's creative, he's willing to try new things, willing to even listen to his players, listen to Harden and his input. And I'm sure that's something that would be discussed before Harden would even sign that contract, right? Whatever Harden is looking for, that's going to be established before he would sign that contract. So it is interesting. I wonder if he would just be willing to buy into that type of system. This right here from HP, man, this comment right here is interesting.
Yeah, that's the question mark, man. That is the question mark.
Right here, this one is actually what I meant. So that was the first one leading into this comment. It would be hard for a coach to fully use Harden or understand his caps and limits in a system. It's so true, because even in Doc's system, he still had the 45-point game and the 42-point game in games 1 and game 4. So it's like, even in that system, was he not used enough on those nights?
Yeah.
Was that him stepping out of the system and just doing his thing? So, like, those are the blurry lines that we've experienced.
I would say this. I go back to his tenure in Brooklyn, and I go back to when he first came over from Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And how comfortable you felt with him on the floor. And I remember they got down against Cleveland in one of the first games he played in a Sixers uniform last year. And we were down, dude, I don't know, 16, 18 at home. And you never felt out of the game with him on the floor. And they come back and they win the game in large part due to him. I haven't felt comfortable like that with James Harden on the floor in a very long time. And he was very good this season. And he had very highs, a lot of 2 very big highs in the postseason. He also had a lot of lows. The inconsistent, inefficient Harden is the problem, and that's what needs to be figured out. That's why I get annoyed when when he puts blame on Doc, because I do agree with him to an extent, but it's like, bro, Doc has nothing to do with you shooting 2 for 14.
Yeah. Could have been so much better.
Doc has nothing to do with you passing up on 3 layups and 3 floaters in the paint for turnovers. Like,
passing out of layups to PJ Tucker threes, like, that's a decision. Like, that's not Doc's decision.
Here, Sixers offense, most of the year was either ISO or a pick and roll between the two of them. And we love the pick and roll. But I think you saw one version of the pick and roll.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot more in depth that Nick Nurse can unleash with this.
And I think to Brett's point, it's a great comment there as well. I mean, I think we were just in like this like mirage status of mindset where we were watching this happen every game throughout the regular season, and we're like, Embiid's just too dominant, and that pick and roll, and Harden ISO, and Embiid ISO.
It's the only thing you got that worked. That was
the only thing that we got all season that worked. And as soon as that was, capped in the playoffs, as soon as the team attacked that,
that's why I don't know how you can say Nick Nurse is a slight upgrade over Doc Rivers, because
exactly
Doc Rivers was not a problem in the series, and he actually outcoached Joe Mazzulla until Joe Mazzulla made one simple lineup adjustment, and Doc Rivers had his pants coached off after that. Like he had no idea what to do. Literally. He didn't adjust to anything. The pick and roll wasn't there. The offense had nowhere else to go.
Mazzulla threw Robert Williams in the starting lineup, and the series was over.
And Doc was like, "Oh my God, what do we do? I don't know what to do."
The series was over, man.
To kind of wrap up this Nick Nurse segment here, I'll say one last thing on it, and it's something you hit on with being creative and fun. Look, the grass isn't always greener, and I think we take new and we take change for better, and that they don't always equate. But I think in this instance, going from Doc Rivers to a guy like Nick Nurse, I think the grass will be greener, but nonetheless, it brings life back to a lifeless basketball fan in South Philadelphia for me. Because as deflated as I was after that Game 7 loss, different now means a possibility of being better, a different style of offense. What can we build around Joel? How will all this different stuff, all this movement, the rotations, obviously free agency this month, it's like it's a breath of fresh air right now for me with the Nick Nurse hire, because yes, different doesn't always equal better, but it will definitely equal intrigue and fun for me for the time being. And then we'll start to see if it equals better as the regular season comes back around. For real. We might have a solid inbound play.
I think that's a great point, though. It does bring life back to the situation. You compare that to if they signed a Frank Vogel. I mean, there's just nothing to get excited about there. I did want to ask you one more thing about
Even
Nick Nurse,
promoting like
though.
Sam Cassell, that doesn't do anything for me.
Yeah, it's not enough change in my mind, right?
No.
Like that's a guy that was under Doc Rivers. I was not interested in that wholeheartedly. Um, Another question for you regarding Nick Nurse: is there any worries about his? I know I mentioned it with Harden, but just with this team, with Philadelphia in general, but just his public approach. He tends to call out his own guys in public.
Yeah.
He's not afraid to call out referees. He's not afraid to call out anybody.
No, I think it'll be a breath of fresh air here, man. I really think it will. And I felt bad for Doc when he put out that statement on Instagram. And
I did too.
You did learn that Doc was tough, but you also got the asshole side of Doc as well at times.
Yeah.
I think you're definitely going to get an arrogant, asshole-ish side of Nick Nurse. But it was funny. I was going back and forth with Abe on Twitter yesterday, and he posted, the one clip of Nick Nurse with like his jaw dropped and his hands up during the Sixers last year, and like that punchable face, and he's blaming the refs and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Bro, that's posturing in this league. That's what and he knew his team didn't have a chance, and that punchable face only sticks out when it's a competitor, when it's competition. When he's your own now, I don't think we're going to view Nick Nurse in that light anymore. I think we're going to view Nick Nurse in like that when he's getting on a referee, we're going to be like, fuck yeah. Like, but like, it's not going to be like, oh, shut up, you're annoying, blah, blah, blah. It's going to be like, get on his ass. But like, exactly.
And I think, just with the situation last postseason with the Raptors and the Sixers, it's like, they weren't supposed to beat the Sixers. Like, that was not a Raptors team that should have even been competing with the Sixers.
No.
And you're talking about a team, they went down, 3-0 in that series?
Yeah, and they got to 3-2.
3-0. They come back to 3-2, and they're still able
now, granted, Embiid's face got broken, but.
Yeah, I mean, come on. Like, that's a team that shouldn't even be competing with that Sixers team, and they take them to 6 games. So, I'm with you, man. I'm excited wholeheartedly. Fred VanVleet, how do we feel there? Is there, bring him in, right? Like, he's one of those guys, man, where you look at the rest of this postseason, the Derek Whites, the Caleb Martins, the Gabe Vincents, the Grant Williams. Now,
he's a level up.
He's elevated himself to a level up, but that's who he used to be.
Fred VanVleet.
He is that killer.
Right. Fred VanVleet is still, to me, a borderline all-star. I think he had a very mid-year. I think Toronto as a whole had a very mid-year. It's why Nick Nurse was relieved of his coaching duties. They were the definition of average this year, right? I just think that Fred VanVleet is still a very good player, and he would technically be a role player here in Philly. But when you're discussing his from a name value with the likes of a Caleb Martin and those and Derek White, he is a tier or two above those guys name value. Now, take nothing away from what Caleb Martin is doing in Miami right now in this postseason run. Take nothing away from what Derek White just did with the game winner and the couple clutch buckets last night when Boston still had it within reach. Like, those guys have been great. To me, Fred VanVleet is just on like another platform.
Yeah.
Talent-wise.
I agree.
And it's like, if you could bring him in, like
it'll
be interesting. And not just him, Scott. Like, think about a guy like a Chris Boucher, like a Gary Trent Jr. you and I were discussing, who I believe when we did those trades, were those player options or were those team options?
So Boucher is actually locked in until next year, so he's not a free agent at all.
Okay.
Gary Trent Jr. is a player option. Otto Porter Jr. is a player option. Fred VanVleet is a player option. And then Jacob Podol, he's another interesting guy for backup center as well. He's an unrestricted free agent who actually played very well up in Toronto.
See, man, like, that's where my mind goes now. Now that the head coaching vacancy that's gone and we have our guy and it's the guy we wanted, it's like, now let's look towards June 30th. Let's start to figure out what this roster could be. And we're going to get into that as the summer continues on here. But it is like, if I had to ask you this before we move on to wrap up the show, how much different do you expect or can the Sixers roster realistically look with or without James Harden? Because while it seems like we're in somewhat of a cap struggle situation this offseason, there's 4 spots opening up off the bench right now. Like Niang, McDaniels, Paul. Like, we're sitting here talking about Paul Reed playing the floor. Paul Reed's a free agent.
Yeah.
So, like, are you like, you know what I mean? What kind of bag does he bring in? So it's like
depends, yeah, because he's a restricted free agent, so
okay,
the Sixers can match. But if somebody comes out and throws him a bag, I mean, are you going
right?
to
Are
match
you going
that
to
for
do
Paul
that?
Reed? You're
Right.
not.
Yeah,
So
man, I think
it's interesting.
it's definitely going to. And then you had the Harden situation when he opts out. You're talking about 5 or 6 pieces missing from at least the
Harden
regular
is a
season
huge piece
Sixers.
of that.
Right.
McDaniels is a guy that seems like he would fit with Nick Nurse. Just length, the variability within the position. He can play 2 through 4 basically. So I think he's an interesting piece that they'll try to figure out. Paul Reed also would fit that mold of them trying to bring him back. George Niang, he's the guy that I don't think Nick Nurse
George
is
is gone
fine with this. Yeah, I don't think they were going to do that again, anyways.
right.
But I think definitely with Nick Nurse and that defensive approach,
So,
that
like,
just doesn't fit.
But let me ask you, me and you looked at the cap, and I know they're in somewhat of a sticky situation still, and it depends how much they're willing to go over and pay. But like last year, I remember when the season ended, me and my uncle were down the shore, and we were like, what's it going to take to get you to what's it going to take to get this roster to the next level, even with Harden back? And it was like we and him said we need 3 new pieces. And we thought we got that. We got D-Melt, we brought in PJ, you brought in Daniel House, you brought in Montrezl Harrell towards the beginning of the season. We're like, okay, this is what we were talking about. Now, obviously, at least half of those pieces didn't really work out to the best of their ability. How many new contributing factors do you think you can realistically see on this Sixers team? Do you think we're going to see 3 or 4 new faces that can play meaningful minutes? I guess especially if like that, if he's able to move Tobias, I guess that's the biggest thing, right?
Yeah.
And you bring in 2 pieces for Tobias, sign 2 pieces, and now bada bing, bada boom, new roster, right?
Yeah, I think that's the key. You do have a trade exception. I think that from the which trade was that from? They got a trade exception. I think it was from the trade deadline. Maybe it was a different deal, but they do have a trade exception that they can use that gives them extra cap within the trade. But I would say the biggest thing is the Tobias Harris trade. That has to happen, whether that's for actual players in return or just getting that contract off the books so you can go and engage in free agency. That's going to be a key piece in this, like a key cog in this system, right? Okay, yeah, the Thibault trade. So that makes sense. So they got a trade exception from that.
That Scotty, that's another angle I really haven't looked at the Tobias Harris trade packages at. It's like, yeah, we're sitting here thinking, well, maybe you can get 2 pieces after looking at the King package. But it's like if you move that for a nobody and you know some draft picks or whatever, now you're opening what, 38, $39 million up off the books for a couple.
If somebody is willing to eat that contract and not give us anything back, like as far as player contracts, that's a no-brainer, man. That's going to clear so much cap space. Now the Harden situation obviously different.
Right, we have to eat the Harden.
If he walks, you would hope that you can at least get a sign and trade. That's like the last saving grace with James Harden, but. I think either way, if you're able to trade Tobias, whether you get 1 or 2 players back in that deal, clear some cap space back in that deal, you're going to be able to go out and get 3 to 4 guys that can make a difference on this team, I would say.
And you know what's funny? It makes you think. It makes you think, like, when are they even eligible to do that? It's after the season ends. I know that. Like, they can't do it during the finals. But, like, when does that begin? Because it makes you think, like, that would have to be before or on the first day of free agency, because if they're looking to clear that cap space, you're not going to do it 6 days into free agency. Everybody you could possibly want with that 37 mil is gone.
I'm trying to think. I'm having a hard time remembering like if the draft is before free agency starts.
Oh yeah, I believe it is.
It is, right? So
NBA draft 2023. Okay, you don't want to. June 22nd.
June 22nd.
Yeah.
And then when's free agency start?
Okay, yeah. So trades can happen then, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So at least probably right after the finals end.
And free agency starts on the 30th
of June.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. So the draft's on the 22nd, which is probably when.
So you have over a week before then. So he'll have time. My point was like
clear that cap space.
Like Tobias Harris might have less than a month left in Philadelphia because if he's going to get moved, it's going to be by July 1st. Like,
is there any world where you feel that Tobias Harris could be salvageable in Philadelphia, where he's not worth trading? With
I just don't know anymore, man,
right?
because I still love Tobias the guy. And I like Tobias Harris the player. I don't know the role he serves on this team. We talked about it. What is a fourth option? What is a fourth man?
Yeah.
And that's not a thing. And then you get into, well, can he be a role player? You're talking about moving him to the bench then for me, man. Like, because I said to you last night, like, Scotty, on a name value, you're taking Tobias Harris over Caleb Martin. But off the Sixers bench, who would you rather have playing for them right now?
Yeah, Max
Caleb Martin, Gabe Vincent, or Max Strus, or Derek White?
That's where we're at, and that's a problem. Yeah, so no,
exactly.
I agree. It's not salvageable.
So it's like, and don't get me wrong, in a very depressing Game 7, he was like the only dude to actually show a heartbeat, a pulse in this game.
But that's how it always is, right? Like when it doesn't really matter,
right?
He shows up. So yeah,
Game 6, he scores 2 points.
Yeah, I'm good on that. So I agree. Yeah, got to move Tobias out, and then they do have the mid-level exception. They have some veteran exceptions they can put out there to sign some guys. You bring in Nick Nurse, you have Joel Embiid. Maybe you can get guys to come and sign for less, but you gotta see how it plays out. I'm excited nonetheless. This gives us a light at the end of the tunnel going into next season.
Exactly. This is where I'm at, man. This is where I'm at. When you watch teams like the Celtics and the Heat play, let your stars be the stars. That being Joel Embiid, if Harden comes back, and Maxey. 3 is the limit. You got 3 guys in the starting lineup that can score the rock, that should get the most attention, that should get the most shot attempts. After that, your scoring and looks need to come off of the bench. Tobias Harris wilting away in the corner as a fourth option in the starting lineup, and then we're running George Niang and Paul Reed and Jalen McDaniels and guys that can't score coming off the bench together as a unit. That does nothing for me.
Yeah.
Let the 2 or 3 guys be the focal point, and then have the other options really coming off of the bench. I wholeheartedly agree.
You look at these players in the Eastern Conference Finals, man. The Heat and the Celtics, they have had games won by Derek White.
Yep.
By Malcolm Brogdon, right? Against the Sixers. Caleb Martin, obviously, as you discussed.
Caleb Martin was just the best player on the Miami Heat this season.
In that series, right? Gabe Vincent, game
most
2,
consistent,
29
I'll say,
points.
at least, if not better than Jimmy.
Gabe Vincent in game 2 with 29 points to help them steal another one in Boston. Like,
Bam
that doesn't happen for the
last
Sixers.
night. Bam Adebayo stunk up TD Garden, and Miami won by 20. Their second best player stunk, and they won by 20. It shows the lengths of depth and role players and scoring. And it's changed my mentality on how to build the Sixers roster. Forget top-heavy play.
Even over to the Nuggets. KCP, Bruce Brown. Like, these are
Brown.
These
who, by the way,
man.
Bruce Brown, free agent, had some interesting comments about James Harden, how he's his best teammate in Brooklyn. And Bruce Brown, bring Harden back. Bruce Brown want to come over. You know what I mean?
He's exactly what the Sixers need, man. He might price out, but we'll see, man.
Absolutely.
I'm definitely excited.
But yeah, before we wrap up the show, I know we want to spend more time on it. Maybe we'll spend more time. We'll open the show with it tomorrow as well. But obviously, DeAndre Hopkins released by the Arizona Cardinals. And just a few short days before he was released by the Arizona Cardinals, and thank you, Jonathan Gannon, for whoever picks up DeAndre Hopkins on a 1-year cheap deal, while Arizona eats his $20-some million contract this year. He handpicked, he name-dropped some quarterbacks he'd like to play for, one of which being Jalen Hurts and the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, I got to ask you, man, there are fans out there that, no, Smitty, AJ, God, we don't need him. We don't need him. Yeah, you're right. We don't need DeAndre Hopkins. But don't look me in my eye and tell me you don't want DeAndre Hopkins. 1 year, 12 mil, 1 year, 14 mil for DeAndre Hopkins. They can afford it. Is DeAndre Hopkins a fit in Philadelphia is my question for you.
Absolutely, he's a fit
Thank
in
you.
Philadelphia.
Thank
He's a
you.
fit everywhere.
Thank
That's
you.
the problem with this conversation going around Philadelphia Eagles Twitter, man. I saw, and mad respect to Lord Brunson. He's one of the best Eagles content creators out there. But he was one of the main guys that was out there saying, Eagles fans need to stop saying go after everybody.
I agree with that.
Sometimes that doesn't upgrade the team. This is an upgrade. You're talking about a wide receiver 3. You're talking about Quez Watkins versus DeAndre Hopkins. If D-Hop is on your team in the Super Bowl, you win the Super Bowl?
Right.
Yeah, you win the Super Bowl. Right. You probably go undefeated last year.
And here's the thing. I love Smitty and I love AJ. And at this point, another year older, I don't know where I rank D-Hop and, when we do our top 10 rankings. Let's stop acting like DeAndre Hopkins probably still ain't a top 10 wide receiver in this league, if not even slightly higher than 10. So when everyone goes, oh, wide receiver 3, we say that because we already love our 1 and 2 in place.
Exactly.
You throw them in the roster, you don't have a
anywhere.
1, 2, or 3, bro. Yeah. You got 3 1s. That's what you got on this team. So there's people, would Smitty and AJ be okay with, obviously because D-Hop would take the ball away from them at times. And, you don't get me wrong, Nick would have to change up the offense a little bit because you'd need those 3 on the field a lot together. But don't we run AJ, Smitty, and Pascal and AJ, Smitty, and Quez out on the field together? So I'm confused where we couldn't run AJ. I agree wholeheartedly with you, bro. Let's stop. I think that's one of those situations. Hopkins.
I think that's one of those situations where you go to AJ and Smitty before you do it, and you ask them, hey, obviously this is DeAndre Hopkins. This is one of the best players at your position.
And by the way,
we know we have 2 studs here that have gone over 1,000 yards last year. Is this going to be okay? Because we're trying to win a goddamn Super Bowl.
Yeah. And if it's not okay, I need to have a discussion with whoever says
why is it not okay?
Exactly, because you need the ball. Listen, I know wide receivers can be prima donnas. I want to win a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And DeAndre Hopkins does exactly that. You can never have enough talent in the NFL. You can never have enough talent and star power at a skill position, especially like wide receiver. You want to talk about Jalen Hurts, taking another step towards MVP. My goodness, this trio. Is it going to happen? I think it's unlikely. I mean, I think, to me, I never know. Buffalo, that's where I think he's going to end up with Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs. But cap-wise, I don't know how. Again, he's
Buffalo and Kansas City do not have the cap, really. Say he wants just a $5 million deal to go with what Arizona's paying him this year. They don't even have enough for that. So, I don't know. It's an interesting concept because the Eagles are the one.
The Eagles' offense is already tops in the league in so many categories. If you are an opposing defense, what in the actual F are you supposed to do if you're staring at what Brett is laying out right here? What are you supposed to do?
Exactly.
So, yes, DeAndre Hopkins
1-year buy-in for the Super Bowl.
Exactly.
That's all it is, man. It's not like he's coming to take Smitty's spot. He's not coming to take his spot. Smitty's still going to get his extension down the line. It's not about that. It's 1 year
AJ's
all
here
in.
for 3 more years.
Relax.
Calm down, peeps.
Let's make the team better always. That should always be the number 1 goal. We cannot worry about
You know what it is? Because fans now, this team that Howie's put together in the Super Bowl run last year, and there's a couple homegrown guys and Jalen's development. You know what it's their baby, right? And they love Smitty, and again, they love AJ, and you don't want to take. And I just can't find it funny enough when people are like, "You don't need a wide receiver 3, dog."
See,
DeAndre Hopkins ain't your wide receiver 3.
And
I love Devontae Smith as much as you do. And I know DeAndre Hopkins is another year older. If we're talking right now, Devontae Smith that in a year or two, would you rank on a list Devontae Smith ahead of DeAndre Hopkins?
I'll say this. That's a conversation for another day. Okay. Because I actually wanted to say something to you last night about that because there's been a lot of conversation. Is Devontae Smith a top 10 wide receiver? we can have that discussion and maybe dive more into
I love Smitty, and I think
I love Smitty. Because there's part of me that feels like Smitty may be better than AJ Brown. Like, I'm not lying to you. Like, there's part of me that feels that he may be the more complete wide receiver.
That's funny. We have these conversations all the time on Turf Talk when we do these kind of like, a guy like Keenan Allen is severely underrated for his route running ability and his hands. And Devontae Smith does a lot of those little things, technique, the speed, the quickness, all that you might not realize on the field. But you think AJ Brown is just a better receiver. He's bigger, he's stronger, right? Has a couple more big plays. I'm just saying, again, I'd have to go back. I don't know what D-Hop put up last night or last year, not last night. Last year in a bad Cardinals offense.
For the
he was suspended, but I mean, Scotty, my God, I think on our wide receiver list last year, heading into the year, we had D-Hop top 3 or 4. I think we had a top 5. I have to go back and look, man. But top 7. Either way, I mean, what are you going to say? Another year older, he drops a couple slots. All right, it's top 9 or 10.
I'm not disagreeing. I guess what I'm saying is Smitty is in this conversation with top 10.
I agree.
He's up there,
I agree. I'm not trying to be that guy that's just taking the name value of DeAndre Hopkins and underappreciating what we already have.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is everybody needs to stop saying, oh, we can upgrade Quez Watkins. You can upgrade the room as a whole with DeAndre Hopkins because you don't have a 1, 2, or 3. You got 3 number 1 wide receivers. And if that's a problem for an Eagles fan, I don't know what to tell you. I
would say the biggest thing for me is, as far as like an attractor for this, right? Why do I want D-Hop on the Eagles? Like, why will I say I need D-Hop on the Eagles? Just remember every time that Smitty landed on his back off a big catch and he got up slow, was winded, or, AJ Brown twists his ankle and he's walking around. It looks like his Achilles popped out.
I love this.
Imagine that feeling when your stomach drops and you think one of your wide receivers are down.
Yeah.
Now you have D-Hop there to come in and play that rather than Quez Watkins.
Or what about vice versa? If D-Hop goes down, right? Oh, no.
Yeah,
DeAndre Hopkins got hurt. Oh, shit. We still have Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown.
Exactly. Because my heart dropped every time it looked like A.J. Brown might be injured and might not be able to come back. My heart dropped. It happened in the playoffs, right? Against the Giants, I think.
I believe so.
Where he's limping off. He exits the game. Obviously, we were up by a lot, but we didn't know if he was going to play the next week against San Francisco. Yeah. He ended up playing, but nonetheless, you have D-Hop there. Once again, it's the same thing as like you got into that conversation around the draft about do the Eagles take a corner if that's best position available. This is a lot different because D-Hop is a proven player. He's a proven product, not a draft pick. But if you're talking about adding another corner to that secondary with Darius Slay and James Bradbury, once again, not only does it give you a great third corner, it gives you insurance for a duo that didn't go down once last year.
Exactly.
Same thing with Smitty and AJ. They didn't miss games last year. That doesn't happen often.
And Scotty, just think about it this way, bro. Like, let's stop acting like our wide receivers play 100% of the offensive snaps.
Exactly.
So all those plays last year, I pointed them out to you, and I'm pretty sure they were always run
plays. Quez is in instead of AJ?
And it's just Quez Watkins lined up out wide. Now, what if that package is just DeAndre Hopkins lined up out wide?
Yeah.
You get what I mean? Like they're not playing 100% of the snaps, bro.
And then Quez Watkins is at wide receiver 4, and that looks a lot more acceptable. That looks a lot better with
our fan base.
At wide receiver 4.
I love our wide receivers just as much as all of you do. We are the only fan base I know that will argue with each other on social media on whether or not we want DeAndre Hopkins. We don't need him. I agree with you. But to say you don't want DeAndre Hopkins in Midnight Green is one of the most asinine statements of 2023. Will it happen? I don't know. But the fact that the Eagles are even in the conversation because he wants to play here with Jalen Hurts, wants to play here to contend on 1 year for a Super Bowl, that tells you all. He's giving the Eagles their flowers before he even comes here, putting them in that conversation. Okay?
Yeah.
That's that. that is going to wrap up this Tuesday edition of the Phaithful Fanatics Show, guys. As always, don't forget to check out our friends over at manscaped.com using promo code DSM at checkout for 20% off plus free shipping. Again, that is promo code DSM for 20% off your total order and free shipping over at manscaped.com. Let them know that your friends at DSM sent you. Your balls will certainly thank you. Scotty and I will be back tomorrow morning live at 8 a.m. No more technical difficulties, hopefully. But we'll be talking more Sixers. We'll get into some Phillies, and we're going to continue this DeAndre Hopkins wide receiver talk for the Philadelphia Eagles. For myself, for Scotty, for DSM Media, have a great rest of your Tuesday.
Go Birds.